accionat això? Com ho talles?
Hello. Hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Linda Connor. I'm happy to be here for PhotoAlliance, and today's presentation from Spain, all the way from Spain. I'm going to calm down. With Joan Von Komberta. But first, I'd like to say this is the second of our PhotoAlliance International Lectures. And I have a big shout out to our PhotoAlliance affiliates, the San Francisco Art Institute, especially for their technical support, and to the San Francisco alumni artists who help us reach a truly international audience. Coming up, please mark your calendars. Saturday, April 10th, we will be having Ruth Van Beek speak about her work from Holland. And on Saturday, May 8th, Yasu Matsumoto and Kazu Miyoishi from Japan. Now, we will be having a question and answer period after the presentation. And if you have questions, we would welcome them, but please put them in the Q&A section. You'll find that somewhere, rather than in the chat. So Heather Snyder will be curating those, and at the end of the presentation, she'll be coming on and welcoming your questions. Juan Von Komberta comes to us from Spain. I first encountered him back in 1997 when he was visiting San Francisco presenting his work. And at that time, I acquired his recent book and catalog of his work, Artificial. And alas, the whole book is in Spanish. So some of it is still a mystery to me, but I got to use my imagination with it, and it's truly one of my all-time favorite photo books. He often plays with two of my favorite subjects, photography and natural science. He is an artist who lets his fascination loose in the archive of discovery and science, and this book is truly a cabinet of curiosities. Amazing new animals are discovered. Neither flora nor fauna are spared his creativity and creation. Plants sprout horns that Carl Blausfeld would be amazed by. Fish walk. Turtles grow fur. These are all carefully documented by their pith-helmeted discoverers. Documents are recorded. Human anatomy and sexuality are not spared his arrangements and tinkering. A vagina dentata emerges. He gives us collages and collections, photograms. There is much floral wallpaper that he photographically fucks with. There is a postcard collection of the Madonna Inn, wildlife postcards of exotic Africa, but as well as the creative hoaxes and humor, he also shows us the brutality humans bring to our shared nature in his chilly collection of white trophy hunters. In a recent book, The Pigeon Photographer, Von Komberta dives again into history, photography, and animals. In this case, pigeons doing aerial photography during the First World War. This quaint and quirky book does become serious when he asks if these were the first military drones. I can think of few photographic artists whose work is as multifaceted and adventuresome as Juan's. He is in good company with the likes of the young Jacques Lartigue, Man Ray, Frederick Sommer, and Vic Muniz. We are so very fortunate to have him with us to share more projects and more recent investigations into photography and the archive. Please do welcome Joan Fontcuberta.
Hello. Good morning. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk before you. And first of all, I would like to acknowledge, I would like to tell that I'm in debt to Linda Connor for inviting me to do this presentation within the PhotoAlliance lecture series, and as well to Heather Snyder, who have been taking care of all the organization details. I would like to focus on a couple of current projects of mine, works I'm doing in the past few years. But before that, I feel it's important that I provide some context. I did my first solo show in 1973. So in 2 years, I will be able to show off of a photographic career for a span of half a century, 50 years. And I've been quite a prolific artist. I've done more than 100 projects, and it's always difficult to pick up the right ones when I prepare a presentation like today's. I mean, I'm always concerned, what can I present in order to fit in the interest of my audience? So I wonder if finally you will agree that the selection of projects will be pedagogic enough to make you understand what are my current concerns. I was self-taught in photography. I didn't study it, I was not trained as a visual artist. Instead, I studied communications and worked for a couple of years in advertising and journalism. And this professional experience trained me to persuasion techniques, trained me to lie, and trained me to create illusions. And at a certain point, I decided that I wanted to invest the skills I learned, not to fool people, but instead to teach the way the illusion is constructed. So sometimes my works deal with the strategy of fake, but it's not presented as a fraud, just the opposite. I'm trying to explain, to unveil, to unmask the construction of the fraud, of the hoax. Okay, so in order to do so, I choose photography for a specific reason. Photography was a kind of tool which embodied a transcription of reality, a kind of literal transcription. And I was very concerned with the genealogy of the medium. Besides being a photographer, I've been interested in photography as a historian, as a docent, as a curator, and organizing photo events and publishing books, creating festivals. So I've had different hats on my head dealing with the photographic activity. And I think that this range of activities have provided a more transversal interest in photography. So actually, I am focusing in three main factors. I'll try to explain them briefly and then jump to images. Actually, it will be mainly, a visual presentation with some comments. Probably you all agree that photography was one of the pillars of the Industrial Revolution and of the techno-scientific sensibility during 19th century. And the invention of photography was one of the cluster of innovations that fostered the dramatic expansion of modern transportation and communication systems. Then there were three examples, like the other communication systems which had a similar worldwide impact: the railway, the steamship, and the telegraph. I believe that these three elements make the world smaller, connect people in a closer sense, and because of that had a dramatic impact in communication. Photography did the same, but in maybe three different levels. From an economic and political perspective, photography contributed to the control of the world by means of its symbolic appropriation. In 19th century, before armies arrived to conquer a territory, first photographers depicted the territory and took this kind of symbolical appropriation in order to prepare the arrival of this more physical appropriation. From a social and cultural perspective, the camera acted as an instrument of benediction and of archive, facilitating what we can call the encyclopedifying of knowledge, of visual knowledge. And third, from a spiritual and religious perspective, photography transcended finitude and death and aspired to magically supplant reality. So because of these three levels, I feel that the fundamentals, the ideological fundamentals of photography were truth, memory, and materiality. My work has been dealing with these three elements. Let me share the presentation with you. Let me see if I can do that easily. And I will start with my presentation. Okay. I have titled this talk Photographic Monstrosities, and you will understand how the idea of the monster has been seminal in my work in very different levels, in very different elements. I mean, the biological monster, the technological monster, the semiotic monster. You will see. Okay, I will start with one of the projects which Linda mentioned, Herbarium, which I did between 1982 and 1985. In this series, I created a kind of botanical atlas, like plates depicting strange specimens. Okay. By the way, when Linda referred to my book published in 1992, Historia Artificial, actually there's an English translation at the end of the book. So if you want to read the full text, you have that version available for you. Okay, so this is a project which has two different origins. At one hand, what we can call the eccentricities of nature. So we know that nature sometimes provides surprises. And for instance, now I'm showing one can be a surprising figure. This is a very weird plant. It's called corpse flower. The technical name is Amorphophallus titanium, which in Latin means something like giant penis or giant phallus. Well, explained like that, you will probably think, well, this is just an invention. Huh? This guy, he's dealing with fakes, always joking. Probably this is made up. Okay, either that you check that in the internet, the Wikipedia, and you will prove that this is not a story I made up. This is true. Nature can be known, but there are always exceptions, always elements which go farther our let's say, common sense. Well, why this plant is so special? Well, first of all, it's the highest in the vegetable kingdom. It raises about 3 meters. It's originary from Indonesia, from the Sumatra island, and it's called corpse flower because of its odor. It's smelling when it's blooming. It's smelling like rotten organic matter, like rotten meat. Huh? And then this is the way the plant uses to attract flies and other insects for pollination. Well, as I said, I'm interested in these kinds of, let's call, monstrosities, which means elements which are singular. Linda mentioned the cabinet of curiosities, the Wunderkammer. Yes, I'm very interested in this museum model because the Wunderkammer was devoted to unique pieces, singularities, not orders, not categories, not typologies. No? Okay, so this is one element. The second element is scientific or botanical illustration. I'm concerned, I'm very interested with all this kind of art made not for poetic or expressive intent, but just to depict the world as it appears in order to transmit its morphology, its qualities, its visual appearance. So these two things maybe make me arrived to the discovery of German photographer Karl Blossfeld. Blossfeld was one of the leaders of the Neue Sachlichkeit, the new objectivity, the German movement which initiated modernistic photography in Europe. Actually, Blossfeld was not considering himself as a photographer. He was a sculptor, and he was teaching fine forge at the Kunstakademie, at the art school in Berlin, in the first third of 20th century. And he was still rooted in the Romanticism spirit and believed that the art inspiration derived from the organic shapes from nature. And because of that, he wanted to teach his pupils how that inspiration in architecture, in jewelry, in sculpture, in forge, and so on, was taking the morphology, the shapes from the botanical world, from vegetables. So he started to photograph in close-up very tiny details of flowers, of leaves, of roots, all kind of vegetable parts, and published a book in 1929 titled Formen der Kunst, which could mean the original forms of art, genuine forms of art. Well, in this book, he was displaying a large degree, a kind of rich atlas of different forms, different compositions, which actually remind of the ornamental elements that we can find in Art Nouveau or Junge style, the decorative arts in the 20s and 30s in the Western world. Well, for instance, these ones. Somehow, the ideology behind these images was a celebration of nature. I said Blossfeld was romantic artist somehow. And he was basing his aesthetic ideas on the values of the sublime. Nature is grandiose, and we should celebrate it. By the way, it's interesting to mention the fact that Blosfeld never considered that those photographs were a piece of art, a corpus, an artistic corpus. Instead, he believed that his sculptures were the main contribution to art history. But today, those sculptures are absolutely forgotten, and instead, these photographs, which were didactic materials to be used in class, are considered like the monuments of the modernistic photography. The elements which change our patterns regarding how a photograph should look like. Objectivity, precise detail, the graphic impact of the foreground over the background, and so on. Okay, so taking this model as a reference, Herbarium appears to be a kind of ironic homage to Blosfeld. Ironic because when I started this series in 1982, we couldn't celebrate longer this idea of sublime nature, because we were living, at least I was living in Barcelona, where I was born, in a contaminated, polluted place, a city with concrete and smoke and noise and things like that. So our relationship with nature is much more critical. So what you see here is something which looks like a Blosfeld photograph, or at least something which looks like a plant, but instead is just a kind of assemblage, a collage, because I did this series of pseudo plants, just wandering around factories and industrial areas and collecting all kind of garbage and debris and detritus and you know, leftovers from that industrial world. For instance, now you see something which looks like a strange plant, which is just a piece of burnt rubber with a small element of toilet paper as the crown. And these images, I provide titles in the Linnaeus system, I mean in the botanical nomenclature. For instance, this is called Illumeta polymorpha. It's an invented name. It sounds funny. It's having some connotations which looks like a kind of ludic element. Or this is called Barufeta godafreda, or this is called Cala rasca, or this is called Astropitus dicotyledoneus. So you see, there's a sequence of images. The first photograph can seem strange to us. It's weird shape, but as I said at the beginning, nature can be very eccentric and provide this kind of unknown elements. The second can be also quite strange, and little by little, the viewer, the audience, finally reacts, and at a certain point, but understands that something's wrong, and that this is not possible. And I like this interior process, the fact that, okay, it's a photograph. Usually the camera depicts what's in front of the lens, but here something's happening. This is not possible. It's against all my logics. It's against all my common sense. And then there's this kind of learning, this kind of experience. If this picture is no longer being the literal translation of a flower, why I did believe the previous ones, why I was so convinced, and then hesitation is introduced in our spirit. I mean, somehow my role as an artist is to advocate for doubt, to advocate for suspicion. in order to be more critical regarding our gaze. So somehow this is, you see, a selection of plants which little by little there's a growing effect of impossibility, a growing effect of irreality, in order to provoke that skeptical reaction. Some visitors of the exhibition will understand immediately. Others will require maybe 2 or 3 images. Others will arrive to the conclusion at the end. But somehow all the visitors finally will have the same will get the same result, will go through the same experience. And this is what I consider the idea underlying my projects, being like vaccinations for this possibility of seduction which photography imposes over the viewer. This kind of exhibition can be done both in artistic institutions, but I think the project is much more powerful when I'm allowed to present it within scientific institutions. For instance, this was a presentation in a science museum in France, and I was able to present the pictures hanging on the wall. But in the display was included vitrines with elements from the museum collection, actual pieces from the herbariums, maybe very antique, very old herbariums, displaying different plates of actually existing plants. The next project I would like to present is Fauna, is more or less the same strategy. You've seen plants, now you will see animals, okay? And in this case, I did that with a friend, a writer, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, Pera Formiguera. And in this case, we created a whole story. I mean, we were using the strategies of the storytelling. And we, as in many of my projects, began with the pretension that we accidentally found archive. For instance, we explained that traveling in Scotland during our holidays, we were, spending some days in a small hotel, and in the basement, the owners had all this kind of material that you see in the picture. And we were, of course, curious, and we realized that there were old photographs, there were notebooks, there were handwritten cards, and some stuffed animals. And of course, we believed that this was the legacy of a naturalist or a scientist who was very interested in the Darwinian theories, the evolution theories, and so on. And then, according to that story, we created a persona, the Professor Peter Ameisenhofen. Ameisenhofen is just the German translation of my friend Formiguera. Formiguera means ant hill. Ameisenhofen in German. And Professor Ameisenhofen was a neo-Darwinistic zoologist who traveled throughout the world because he believed that Darwin was right, but that all theories have exceptions. And he wanted to document the exceptions of the theory of evolution. Well, in order to make this cast convincing and realistic, we created a whole family album. We created, we fake the documentation, which could be the elements to implement the biography of this naturalist. And we explained that we had an accident, and all his research went to this archive because of some circumstances. Actually, it's a book. I cannot summarize the whole story in a few minutes, but it's a project which includes all the visual dimension, but also it has an interesting literary section which was written by Pere Formiguera. So we explained that the materials were damaged because of a flood and because of the poor conservation. And finally, what we present is a selection of the supposedly photographs belonging to that Ameisenhafen archive. And those animals are absolutely weird. For instance, this is called Mycostrium vulgaris, and as you see, it's like an oyster, which is jumping with these monkey legs. And we explain all the physiology of the animal, of the specimen. We explain how this animal is feeding, the sexual reproduction, the metabolism, everything in a very scientific German language. And we include field sketches. We include sometimes the recording of the sound done by the animal, sometimes even some footage, some film footage, and so on. So we just present a funny range of elements dealing with this kind of inventory of bizarre, of monsters, of hybrids. For instance, the Solenoglypha polypodida, a snake with 12 chicken legs. Again, X-ray plate field drawing. The Myodorifera colovercauda, analyzed in laboratory together with the dissection drawing. The Alopex stultus, or the Centaurus neanderthalensis, again with the drawing. And this project was presented in different museums, art museums and science museums. And of course, in science museums, the effect, the impact was much stronger. For instance, this was presented at MoMA in New York, the Museum of Modern Art, at the project galleries. And it was quite astonishing because the museum usually routine was not used to present this kind of installations, mixing stuffed animals with this fake antique prints and so on. This is a presentation more recent at the Science Museum in London. But I insist that I have a lot of fun when the material can be infiltrated in actual science or zoological museums, because in such a way the viewer is the victim of two kinds of authorities. At one hand, the authority of the institution, and at the other hand, the authority of the photographic medium. So you should confront yourself against these two authorities. I will now deal with another project called hemograms. Hemograms are the way to analyze, to test blood samples. Okay, and I did this project during the AIDS struggle in the 90s. The idea consisted in that I was requesting friends and relatives to donate several drops of their blood. I was submitting them with a transparent piece of film, and the participants, those who would like to contribute to this project, should return me that film together with some drops of their blood. Of course, most of my friends were designers, artists, photographers, and so on. So, well, the first drop was always, a circle, proof that the drop falling. But they tried to be more original, and they were playing with the morphological quality of the drop, even with the texture. Sometimes they introduced the film into the microwave to produce a specific effect and so on. So I was, acquiring a very rich and diverse collection of blood drops. And I was using those pieces of film as if they were negative. So I placed them in my enlarger in the darkroom, and I was printing onto cyberchrome paper and doing enlargement. They would be like enlarged photograms, because I was not photographing the blood. I was using the blood as a negative to be projected directly onto the photographic paper. And of course, the blood was a symbol, very rich in different facets, no? Symbol of death, some symbol of identity, symbol of genealogy, of suffering. There were images, at one hand, very abstract, graphically very, very powerful, but at the other, very poetic in the sense that the symbology was also very profound. And then I was doing this kind of installations. I presented that series in museums and galleries, but I always try to display in a very clinic wood, like in a kind of a hospital room, very empty, very cold light, and so on. And usually there was like a booth with a nurse, and during the exhibition, or several hours during the exhibition, for sure during the opening, the nurse was doing blood extractions to the visitors who would like to contribute for the next presentation of the project. And in such a way, the system was being recycling itself, and was implementing with the inclusion, with the incorporation of new blood samples to the production of new pieces. Semiopolis, another project I did around the end of the century. This is a project that I originated in Mexico, in Oaxaca, when I taught a workshop in a photographic center called the Alvarez Bravo Photographic Center. And I was thrilled because it was an old pre-Columbian building, beautiful, which was hosting at one hand, this photographic center, and at the other hand, a library for blind people. And I thought that it was a paradox, that the same roof was, hosting at one hand those who are the experts, or the experts in gaze, in seeing, and at the same time those who are disabled to see, to be able to see through their own eyes. No? And then I was curious. I went to the library for blind people, and I discovered that they had most of the titles you can imagine in the Braille. This kind of language for the fingers, for the blind people. And immediately I got the idea of doing a selection of the 50 more important books for my personal experience in all kind of ranges, for instance, religion, philosophy, literature, science, and so on. And I was photographing the first page of every one of each of these books, but in this kind of perspective, which was creating a kind of science fiction landscape. Huh? It's a landscape of science. It's a landscape, but at the same time is part of a language I cannot understand, a language intended for the blind. So I thought that in this case, the exhibition could include all my photographs, but all the captions and all the text should be presented in Braille language. So the funny thing, the interesting point was that I was recommending that the visit of the exhibition should be done by a couple of people every time. One, a blind one, and the other, a person who is able to see. So one could explain the visual elements, the visual information in the photograph, and the other, the blind one, could read the text in the Braille system. So it was somehow an analysis, no, a reflection on what blind means. Maybe blind means just being illiterate in a specific way of perceiving reality or perceiving the information transmitted through a language. Orogenesis. Orogenesis is a project I started also in the early 90s, and I was an artist in residence at the Banff Center for the Arts in the Canadian Rocky Mountains, and the experience of that beautiful landscape was also thrilling, was shocking to me, no? Because I was using a small camera and pointing in a direction, I was getting a postcard, a kind of touristical calendar plate, huh? Like I had in my memory the idea that this was the typical illustration for this kind of decorative and touristical printed matter. And at that time, I got interested in the first 3D renderer software, which were able to convert maps into three-dimensional landscapes. So how can we represent relief, three-dimension nature of a territory in a flat representation, in a bidimensional representation? Well, we have maps, okay. And these maps have some color codes, like this color chart. And in an arbitrary way, we assign a color to a specific elevation, a specific height. For instance, the blue would be corresponding to the 0 level, 0 meters or 0 feet. It's the sea level, okay? And the green maybe will be 100 feet, and the yellow will be 200 feet, and so on. But these colors are arbitrary. It could be the opposite. It's just that we should agree at the conventions, at the systems, at the code. Okay, so now imagine that this map color code is the input of a scanner with a computer, which will read the colors and will assign a specific elevation to every different color. So the scanner detects a blue pixel, so it's 0. It's a yellow pixel, 200 feet, and so on. So image with this kind of color code can be transformed into a grid, into a three-dimensional representation of the same landscape. Okay, so with this system, with this mechanism in my mind, I said, okay, let's go and let's subvert the procedure, the modus operandi. Let's fool the machine. Okay, so what about if I don't input cartographic data, but I input an already existing landscape? For instance, what about if I input this famous Caspar Friedrich classic landscape, the wanderer above the Sea of Fog, but the computer believes that this is a map, that this is cartographic data, which should be decoded in the usual way the software has been programmed to do. So this is the result. Amazing. I mean, this is like playing surrealism with machines. This is the unconscious of the computer emerging, because this is a possibility inherent in the technology, in the deep technology heart. But it's been forced to emerge and to create this kind of procedures. So how is it working? This is Antoni Tapis, the Catalan painter. This is a picture. And now I place this picture as a map in the, for instance, the software I was using is terra. It's called Terragen, but there are many different Bryce, World Builder. There are many, and they all work in the same way. And I place the position of my point of view of my camera, which is the green spot, and I point in a direction, which is the red spot, and then there's a wide angle or a telelens according my decisions. At a certain point, when you click with your mouse and ask for the renderer, you get this kind of landscape. Okay, so I thought, well, this is a wonderful way, a wonderful road to deal with this, let's say, postmodern idea of images creating new images, landscape which provide new landscapes. Usually landscapes are important because they are a place of memory. So I titled also the book I published with Aperture in the States, Landscapes Without Memory, because these are random new landscapes. These are landscapes which haven't been visited by anyone. There are no battle on this place. There are no expeditions. Nobody have experienced these landscapes. They are brand new, okay? So Orogenesis, it's the generic title of the series. Orogeny is a section of physical geography which takes care of the study of the formation of relief and mountains and valleys and things like that. No? So I was doing, for instance, this was the Turner painting, and this is the orogenic translation. This is a Constable, and this is the translation. This is a Courbet, and this is the translation. This is a Cézanne, and this is the translation. This is a Monet, and this is the translation. This is a Van Gogh, and this is the translation. And I was invited by different museums, for instance, the Dali Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida, to visit the collection, select some original paintings by Dali, and did also some orogenic landscapes from my own. No? And I see you have an installation shot in which you see the original Dali painting next to my pseudo-photographic interpretation. I did the same with not only painting landscapes, but also photographic landscape. For instance, Roger Fenton and the Crimea pictures, and this is the translation of the Fenton image. Or Gustave Legret, the French, again 19th century, and the photograph done by the Orogenesis system. Eugène Atget, and again the landscape. And finally, Man Ray and Marcel Duchamp, Élevage de poussière, and the result. Okay? And again, I was presenting these exhibitions in geographical, scientific museums together with plaster models of territories, of landscapes, in order to provide this kind of confusion. Okay, so this has been the introduction. Now I go fast because time is running to my recent projects. Trauma. Okay, in Trauma, I'm visiting archives looking for damaged images, negatives and prints. Because of poor conservation or because of different circumstances, photographs get damaged. It can be a cause of humidity, a cause of microorganism, a cause of I don't know, mold, fungi, and so on. Unfortunately, photographs are intended to last for a long time, but they will never last forever. And I'm interested in this agonic moment, this agonic stage. No? For instance, when the film is old nitrate, it gets very usually these kind of things. No? Well, history of photography, especially social documentary photography or photojournalism, has been mainly dealing with dramatic or traumatic episodes of life, no? Wars, disasters, suffering, murders, all these kind of tragedies, of human tragedies, historical tragedies. And in this case, I wanted to look for the trauma of the image itself. So we are not only watching this kind of effects of violence that humankind experience, but the fact that the document, the witness, which is the photograph, is also in a kind of decaying of traumatic element. And I thought that this was quite paradoxical. And I was interested in this idea of the moment of the photograph becoming a ruin. The moment in which the photograph is losing the connection with the reference in the real world, and there's only this effect of chemistry remains, and so the photograph, it only refers to itself. There's still some dialogue with the external reality, but it's a kind of balance which is vanishing. Somehow these are photographs which will be disappearing soon, but in this last moment, in this last stage of their life, they are still able to provide some poetry and some nostalgia. I think it's poetically and paradoxically very intense, because photographs were cultural artifacts to preserve memory. So what's happening when the photograph is losing memory? What happens when the photograph is becoming amnesic? So it's the end of one of these values, which were the pillars of the photographic nature, socially and aesthetically. This idea of being the guardians of visual memory. So I'm very interested in this idea. It's like photographs suffering Alzheimer. Unfortunately, I had 2 cases of Alzheimer, people in my family, my father and my mother-in-law. So somehow there's a connection with my experience of this terrible illness, this pathology of the memory, and the process of working in this kind of project. As you see, it's very diverse, it's very rich. Sometimes the tonalities are graphically very strong. Sometimes it's more abstract. To me, there's another element which is important, which is the phantom-like nature of this kind of materials. I mean, in some Oriental traditions, ghosts or phantoms are those spirits which are not able to rest because one task remains unfinished, and maybe the unfinished task of these images was precisely to preserve the memory of a particular fact. These are installation shots of this series. I do Duratrans prints on light boxes when I deal with negatives, or traditional prints on paper when I deal with damaged photographic prints. These are just some installation shots of a recent exhibition in Madrid, Spain. And I've been also doing several books on that. For instance, I did a book in Mexico, which was printed with papel amate. Amate is a kind of paper which was already used by pre-Columbian civilizations in Mexico, and it's done of the agave cacti. So it's a cactus fiber paper with an exquisite texture. And well, I've done you have here some shots of the different pages and the structure of the book, which is a book about violence. I was visiting different archives throughout the Mexican Republic, in Mexico City, in Puebla, in all over the country. And because of the climate and the tropical climate and the humidity, they have a lot of problems to preserve for photographic conservation, which is a disaster for curators, but it's a paradise for me for doing this kind of project. And then I've been insisting on the series, and another aspect that I've been paying attention is that the crackle of this kind of wounds, this kind of scars. And this idea of scars has led me to recover the Zen, the Japanese Zen technique of the kintsugi. The kintsugi, when you know, a vase or a cup, a porcelain, or I don't know, is broken, they don't throw it away, but they, you know, try to recompose it, but outline the fractures, the cracks, with a golden thread in order to outline these scars, because they consider that this is not something to hide, but just the opposite, something which is an element of resilience, an element which configurates our own human experience. And this is also well, another publication, very poetic, with this kind of material, again with this sense of melancholy for those remains of the photographic as we all knew it till recently. And this is also an exhibition in a museum in Andorra, which is this tiny country in the Pyrenees between France and Spain. And I will end with the Prosopagnosia project. Prosopagnosia is a pathology of memory which difficult the identification of faces, of facial information. And it's a disease which was discovered in 19th century, and there's no way to take care. But instead, the study of prosopagnosia has set the rules, the basic platform to design the facial recognition softwares. So a lot of surveillance cameras and the systems behind those kind of equipments is in depth with this kind of memory, visual memory difficulty. Well, okay, a couple of years ago, I found the archive of a newspaper, a Spanish newspaper called La Prensa, the press, which was published during the 30s. And the director of that newspaper, called Alonso Bonet, collected portraits of all the celebrities of the time and did a kind of album, just collaging, cutting and pasting all the portraits of public people who could be able to generate a new, which required to be illustrated with the portrait. Okay, so this is a wonderful collection of thousands of politicians, writers, actors, sport people, bullfighters, or whatever. And at that time, I considered that this was like the kind of a radiograph or a diagnostic survey to the celebrities of the moment. And I thought that this was an interesting starting point. Okay, together with another artist called Pilar Rosado, we have our studios very close, and Pilar Rosado is a computer engineer and visual artist, and he was able to design an algorithm able to, by a process of deep learning and by using this new technology called GAN, Generative Adversarial Networks, able to learn from all these faces from that specific archive and generate new possibilities, like new future celebrities, according the basic information of the original portraits. So this is like a plate with several dozens of original portraits, which are presented as facial cards. I mean, we avoid the head, we avoid the tie, all the information around, and we concentrate on just the face, the nose, the mouth, and so on. And then this neuronal network starts doing tests, and it's been working for a complete month, 24 hours per day, with the most powerful computer which exists nowadays in Spain. And little by little was able to, by this process of trial and error, there's one section just generating in an aleatory way, and another section is discriminating, evaluating the result, and by a system of trial and error, improving every time the quality of the photorealistic aspect of the portrait. And finally, we arrive to other kind of portraits which are almost alike to the original ones. I mean, these look like photographic images, and they are just generated by the computer, but they are presented in a specific way which still keep the aesthetics of the photographs printed in the 30s on newspaper quality and so on, as the ones I presented as the originals. So somehow you can just change one by the others and nobody would notice. Well, okay, this is a technique and it may appear as a gadget, but to me, the important thing is the process, not the result. I mean, in this month of working so hard, the computer has transited, I mean, has done a kind of a travel throughout 3,000 years of art history, because some of the original images could remind us of, I don't know, the schematic painting in the prehistoric caves. Then we find images which could look like the Renaissance painting. And then we arrive to the Expressionism, and then we arrive to Picasso and Bacon. And so somehow we are able to find models which have been elements, episodes in the art history according all the span of this evolution. And I feel that somehow this is the proof that we are somehow in the eve of a new visual culture in which the camera and the eye has been, overcome by the algorithm and the visual intelligence. Again, I've done a book with that series. It's a book conceived as a leporello. This is this kind of extending, folding, which is about 17 meters in complete extension, which should be about 50 feet, something like that. And one hand is the images from the original archive, and at the other hand is all the sequence, or a selection of the sequence, the computer, the GAN, the Generative Adversarial Network, has achieved. And this is the way it's presented in galleries. And then I've been repeating the system with different data sets, which are having a connection with our history. You will probably know François Bertillon, one of the leaders of eugenics ideology in 19th century. Bertillon was a policeman and a forensic researcher who invented the police portrait and who was obsessed with the collecting, with the accumulation of photographs and all kind of data regarding all the people who got arrested in French police station. And his archives are full of portraits in that kind. So these are original Bertillon photographs. Again, there are hundreds, maybe thousands, and I've been using them as the input data set in order to repeat the process. So the generative adversarial network is learning from the Bertillon, and little by little is generating portraits which are absolutely identical, equal to the original ones. But again, I would say that I'm more interested in the process, and especially in the accidents that emerge just in a kind of a glitch, in a kind of a chance, arbitrary. That in the just the fascination of being able to replicate the original pictures. Or for instance, I'm now starting a new project with photographs from institutions for the mentally ill, psychiatric institutions and hospitals, who photograph the patients. And again, I'm trying to create a kind of visual atlas of the mentally ill, of the craziness, no? of the madness. No? And these are just the first steps, but the results are very strong in terms of graphic quality, because they remain so close this art brut tradition, the art made by children or by handicapped people and so on. And I will finish with a funny and more ludic aspect, which is with people experiencing orgasms. There's a webpage titled Beautiful Agony, in which they request volunteers to submit video selfies in the moment of experiencing the orgasm. And even they require that in order to participate, you must sign, a form certifying that it's not a fake, that it's an authentic orgasm. And there are more than 3,000 entries if you have the curiosity to check. Well, again, I've done the same together with Pilar Rosado. We took some real portraits of people having the orgasm, and again, the GAN network has been learning how to deduct the graphic patterns which characterize the moment in which a face is expressing the climax of the orgasm. And these are again some of the process of this system. And well, I think that these are, for instance, final results, sometimes not so perfect, but that's what really I enjoy the most. I mean, this kind of imperfections, this kind of monstrosity. And I think that finishing with an orgasm is a very nice way to end my presentation. I think that with these two works, Trauma and Prosopagnosia, we witness two kind of human and historic failures. The failure of memory and the failure of prediction. I believe that human progress or human history has been based upon culture of prediction. I mean that we rely on the culture of prediction, a culture which is currently reaching its peaks with algorithms and artificial intelligence, which, joking, we could consider like the sacred technologies that have pushed us to the naive conviction that everything is predictable, everything is measurable and governable. We acquire security by cornering the fortuitous, the chance, but the not control things, events. But when we have the illusion of have achieved it, reality takes care of throwing us a jug of cold water, such as when a virus suddenly breaks out that nobody knew how to anticipate. I mean, the COVID pandemics is the proof that this culture of prediction should be under critical analysis. There's that sentence that I like very much by by Italian thinker and political activist Antonio Gramsci, which in Italian reads, "Il vecchio mondo sta morendo, che lo nuovo tarda a comparire, e in questo chiaroscuro nascono I mostri." This is, the old world is dying, the new one is slow to appear, and monster as born in this chiaroscuro. I would like to present this exhibition as this presentation as the chiaroscuro, this transition from this old world of analog chemistry-based photography, which is vanishing, and this new world, which is artificial intelligence and robotics and computing and biotechnologies, which is slow to appear, and in between, here we are. And we are artists, we are image makers, and we should somehow contribute to elucidate the future which is yet to come. Thank you very much.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
Thank you, Joan. That was fascinating, and your work is fascinating, and to hear you speak about it was both illuminating and also confusing in a really good way. And I think that's one of the most amazing things about your work. It's very complex, doesn't reveal itself so easily. I feel like there's many layers, and I look forward to going through and revisiting your work again in the book that I have and thinking about some of the things that you've said here today. All of us at PhotoAlliance really appreciate the time that you put into this presentation today. Thank you so much. It was very generous walkthrough of your career dating back to the 80s and from that first exhibition. And it's a lot to think about. So thank you very much. And thank you, Linda, for that, putting this together so that we could all spend this time with Joan this afternoon. And I do have a few questions that have come in during the talk, and I'll just go ahead and pose them here.
Okay.
So the first one I'll start with is from Emily, and she writes, "For your project with the photo negatives, can you go a little deeper into detail on how you're presenting those images enlarged on the light boxes, and what is the material that you use to enlarge them onto?"
Technically, I rephotograph the negatives with a macro lens and a light table, and then whether I choose a fragment of the negative, the area which interests me the most, and then I get a high resolution digital file which I print with a Lambda printer, which is a digital printer, but using chemistry-based material, whether paper or film. And these light boxes are Duratrans prints, which is like a cyberchrome with a transparent material, and well, the light boxes are built with LEDs lighting, which are very neutral in terms of color temperature. I don't know if that question was oriented towards the technical aspect or something else, but that's what I understood.
I'm sure we have a lot of photographers and makers out there in our audience tonight. So I think that was probably
Actually,
a good explanation.
I'm not a very good technician. Huh? I mean, I'm more concerned with the concept and the idea and the discourse, and I learn technique as far as I need it. But I'm not really a big brain for technological solutions.
Understood. So we have another question. This one comes from Sebastian. He says, you say you are an advocate for doubt and suspicion. Are you suspicious of all photographs? And how do you personally resist or accept what you described as the seduction of photography?
Well, yeah, actually, I advocate for doubt, but I'm not paranoid regarding that. This means that at a certain point, you must take some information for granted in order to make decisions. I mean, you must base your decisions upon a verified information. What I want to express is the fact that we should fight against prejudices, against routines, against the laziness of being critical. For instance, we take a look at a photograph, and just to accept and believe is easier than to doubt and confront yourself to the illusion that you are taking a look. I mean that any photograph, like any other human act, is a construction. Reality somehow is an effect of your own experience. And of course, photographs are informations to take into consideration, and sometimes this will be very useful, but you must somehow be prudent and don't taking for granted just because it's a photograph. Because we have been educated, maybe no longer the current generations, but I was born in 1955, and my generation was grew up with the obsession that the difference between a drawing and a photograph was that a drawing was an interpretation of reality, and a photograph was just a photocopy, was just an evidence, a proof. And I disagree with the mistake of this statement. I believe that both the drawing and the photographs are interpretations, are information which is provided according point of view, cultural background, and intention, and so on. So you must just be aware of that, and then take your own conclusions. But you must filter the reading you do of the photograph.
That actually leads right into a next question that we had from Megan. And she asks, why does it matter to you that you created those fictional landscapes using computing and software instead of just photoshopping it or drawing it yourself?
Yeah, because I wanted to play with this fascinating idea that a landscape is recycling another landscape. Of course, I could generate non-existing landscapes with Photoshop, and I've been doing that. But in this case, it was the illustration of the plateau Plato's caves, the idea of the shadows in between reality and ourselves. And those images are hiding reality, the exterior world, and we can only deal with those shadows. And I think that this work is exactly the demonstration of the Platonic theory, because this Orogenesis series is telling us that today, in order to create a landscape, you don't need to go to nature. You need to go and search for pre-existing images, which is art, you know? So we are no longer dealing with the world of facts and objects, but we are dealing with the world of representations. And somehow this is terrible, but this is the way we are dealing in our reality. So again, I think that we must pay a critical attention to that situation.
Okay, thank you. We have quite a few interesting questions coming in. And before I go into this next group, since I noticed some people might have to leave, I just wanted to remind everyone that a link to purchase Joan's book is available. You can click to it through our website. As well, you can get in touch with his gallery in Spain. The link there is also on the PhotoAlliance website. So please feel free to follow up on that afterwards. I have another question now coming from Noah, which says, Joan, thank you for defying the naive believability of photography. You mentioned that photography has been deployed as a means of control since its earliest days, and I value your injection of disbelief as a means of breaking apart effects of control. My question is, are there other measures you have seen that also defy and disarm the believability of photography?
Well, this is a complex question that I try to ask myself sometimes. I feel that as an artist, we are tempted to deconstruct all the ideological architecture of the medium. I mentioned 3 levels that interest me. One is the idea of truth, the other the idea of memory, and the third that I haven't been developing that much today was the fact that the photograph has been an object and now it becomes something unmaterial. And again, in this transit, we are losing some magic. I mean, the photographs have had a kind of spiritual or religious sense in our life. The photographs are the substitution of absent people that we might love. We have, the photographs of the portraits of our family with us, or we display them at home or whatever, because they are a symbolical presence of an absence. Okay, so what's happening when photographs will lose this materiality, this tangibility, this substance, and there will be just unmaterial images flying from a screen to another, which are ubiquitous, which are in my screen, in your screen, and nowhere at the same time. So probably this will change the social rule of photography, the way that we interact with images, the function that photographs have had in our lives. So this is something that also we should study. And then I don't know, there are many other aspects that I would like to deal with. For instance, the relationship of photography and happiness. I think that we take photographs to be happier. And after this statement, there's a lot of theory, a lot of artworks to be done in that direction. Or another idea, what's the relationship of photography and chance? I think that somehow the two ways that historically have been set for the photographic practice, let's say art photography and documentary photography, could be explained in the relationship we adopt towards the importance of chance. For instance, a documentary photographer doesn't like chance, would like to control, would like to discipline a kind of modus operandi in order to expect a precise result. Instead, a photographer who is dealing with experimentation, I think, for instance, in the surreal time, the idea that we should wait for the unpredicted. We should wait for accidents, generate innovations that my conscious attitude would retrain to achieve. So this idea of chance in relationship to photography is also a wonderful area to deal with, both intellectually and in practical terms. So there are many aspects to be passionate and to be fascinated at.
So thank you. And we did have, so Jana wrote in a way asking about what you anticipate in the future. And she says, you talked about our time in history being between these two worlds, from analog to algorithms. And do you see one of these times as being qualitatively better than another? And how do you anticipate our new future?
I'm a poor magician able to anticipate the future. I like to explain a funny story. Maybe 20 years ago, I was interviewed, and I was asked, "What do you think about cell phones, including a camera to take photographs?" And I said, "That's bullshit. You will never see that in the future. It will for sure fail. It's a stupid idea. Photographers, we like cameras very much. We'll never rely on a mobile phone." And so on. And a few years later, I should realize that I was absolutely wrong. So after that experience and that frustration, I'm prudent and I'm a witness of what's going on. I try to acknowledge what can happen, but I'm also an observer of. So I cannot really predict the future for images. For instance, I'm sure that images will be more and more unmaterial. Every time supports for pictorial information will be less important. Maybe there will be images transmitted directly by a kind of telepathic system. So it will be from one brain to another brain. I mean, I'm, for instance, fascinated at some research which is conducted in neuropsychology laboratories in very sophisticated research centers in the States, in Japan, and other areas, in which they are able to project our visual thinking in an exterior screen. So this is like science fiction. This means that I can think of a very simple form, for instance, I don't know, an emoji or a letter or a number, which is very graphic. And then I don't know how this is made in terms of the biology of our brain, but this number, which is thought in the interior of our brain, is projected onto a screen. And if this is being developed further, this means that one day we will be able to store our dreams and be able to project them the next morning when we wake up. I mean, this kind of possibilities are like science fiction. I don't know if you are a fan of the Black Mirror TV series, but
Yeah.
it's like, you know, a fantasy of the screenwriter, the more inventive and crazy screenwriter. No? And this is something which is happening. No? So science will surprise us. No? Nowadays, the rover on Mars sending those pictures, this is just another miracle. We are getting used to this kind of tools, this kind of possibilities, which are expanding our visual culture in an incredible way.
It's been interesting this year in the pandemic when we've been physically restrained so much. I do feel like those of us who are interested in science fiction, I, at least myself, have strayed even further that way. And it wasn't lost on me the irony that there we were reaching out so far onto Mars at the same time that many of us were physically so not moving anywhere. So to be respectful of your time, because I believe it's creeping up on midnight in Barcelona, do you have time for a couple more questions?
Yes, we are night people here, don't worry.
Okay, okay, so I have one from Jamil. Since your work focuses so much on concepts of transformation, why do you anchor these ideas on a motif of monstrosity? What's your personal definition of monstrosity? Or can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, for me, monstrosity is the quality of the individual which outstands from a regularity, a standard, an average, and probably it's the result of anomaly. And this anomaly, we can call it singularity or originality. It's depending of we think of monstrosity in terms of biological concerns, or in terms of technology, in terms of aesthetics, in terms of epistemology, in terms of semiotics. I mean, monstrosity in all these fields is always the exception. The idea of achieves a different form, a different way, a different content out of the more easy, predictable results.
Mm-hmm. Another question coming in kind of goes off of that as well. And this person asked for the GAN photos. Have you noticed that there are any patterns or textures that emerge from the processing and in the photo sets, such as a bias or maybe the erasure of a bias somewhere in the idea of this monstrosity of how the people are portrayed and photographed? And is there something in that process that can be tweaked so that the touch of the process is more hidden or indecipherable?
Well, I'll be honest, I'm not an expert. In this case, I'm part of this team in which the expert is Pilar Rosado. She's a brainy partner, and she's the one, controlling the result. I'm the one trying to make the system fail, introducing this kind of disruption. So the system is intended to produce wonderful portraits, but I'm not interested in perfection. I'm interested in the fact that the software or the tool can do mistakes, and what's happening with those mistakes, So for me, the GAN is like a black box. I know that there's an input and there's an output, but I have no idea what's happening in the entrails, in the interior.
Right.
It's just that I'm experimenting, trying to introduce disturbance in order to get results which are a surprise every time.
So would you describe, because I wonder that personally, I mean, I see throughout your body of work, it's obvious that you are a searcher and an explorer in the medium and in the far edges of how we even think about what photography can do. Do you ever think about what it is exactly that you're looking for? And do you ever feel like, are you looking for answers or are you just posing questions, do you feel?
I'm more interested in questions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But sometimes I disregard the answers. For instance, I like to invent games, not spending time playing with those games. I think it's just a question of attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Being playing against the rules, trying always to change the direction of what's the standard road, the standard way of doing.
I think that is very apparent in your work, swimming in that direction.
I get a lot of fun.
Yeah.
No,
So
I think art must be a joyful activity.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe in the topic idea of the suffering. No. I think we must enjoy doing images. We must enjoy the experience of the image. And to me, that's a very important rule. And you must share this joy with the audience. I'm absolutely against boring art. And unfortunately, there are too much boring art around.
So I have one last question. This one comes from Ville. It says, it seems in many ways that you've always removed or distorted the significance of photographs and taken them to their final conclusion, which is removing the need for having photographs at all. So how do you feel about this? And what do you see, what more can be done in terms of the semiotics of photography?
Well, years ago, I attended a talk by Christian Boltanski, the famous French artist using photography. And he was very radical and threw a statement saying, photography is photojournalism, the rest is painting. This means the rest is art. And I completely disagree, because this is a very restrictive consideration. I try to expand the nature of photography. To me, photography is a bridge to the world, a bridge to society, a bridge to history, a bridge. I mean, it's the way I establish a connection with everything. And I wouldn't limit the scope of photography to a single area. No? Instead, I try to expand it, to make it richer in all the. So I'm not a purist at all. I've been criticized sometimes, telling, well, you are not a photographer, you are, I don't know what, but you are not a photographer. Why not? I mean, I'm instead analyzing the heart of the photographic medium and looking for alternatives, because, for instance, even I'm critical with the historiography of photography. I think that the history of photography has been presented in a very narrow way, because there has been a mainstream which has encompassed the way important museums organize their collections, and the way history manuals are explained, or the way that university programs transmit a certain idea of canon. I mean, what's the important, and I think that we should look for other ways to understand the photographic culture and the photographic practice and the meaning of photography. And I think that the fact that we are having more time distance with the origin of photography, we should have a better perspective to understand the multidisciplinary approaches that photography requires.
Wow, well, I think those might be excellent words to bring this conversation to a close. I think this whole idea of questioning authority has been such an important theme in the past year internationally, and at least here in the US. The authority of the museums, the authority of the canon have all really been challenged and continue to be challenged this year. And there don't seem to be any easy answers. I'm always thankful to artists such as yourself and artists I've met throughout my life who consistently come back and do a really great job of leading us to understand where authority resides and how we can question it and how we can continue to expand the conversation around history and all of these questions and who tells the story. So very, very appreciative. Thank you so much for your time with us today, Joan. Hope someday we can see you here in person in San Francisco again.
I would love so, yeah.
Okay, and thank you so much to Linda and to Chris Paddock and Lucian Liu, who have been working behind the scenes with us this afternoon to make everything come together. So thank you all very much, and to all of our attendees and your fabulous questions. So thank you so much, and
have a good day.
Have a good night, Joan.
Be happy.
Okay, good night.